The self-help books didn't fail you because you didn't commit to them. They failed you because they were never designed to reach what's actually broken. And once you understand the difference between a surface solution and a root intervention, the failed attempts stop feeling like evidence of your limitations and start feeling like something else entirely. This video is about that difference. Not to discourage you from the things you've tried. Not to tell you the answer was somewhere else all along and you just missed it. But to give you a framework, a precise one, for understanding why a very specific kind of pain requires a very specific level of intervention, and why applying the wrong level, no matter how sincerely, will always produce the same result. So let's start with what that cycle actually looks like, because you may recognize it. You find something that makes sense, a book, a framework, a therapist who finally seems to get it, a retreat that promises to take you back to yourself. And for a while, it works. Not just superficially works, it genuinely works. You feel lighter, you have language for things, you sleep better, you are kinder to yourself for a few weeks. You think, this is it. This is the thing that finally reached it. And then, gradually, without drama, the hollow comes back, not all at once. That's what makes it so disorienting. It seeps back in. The clarity fades. The language you found stops feeling like yours. The version of yourself you caught a glimpse of goes quiet again. And now there's a new layer on top of the original pain. The suspicion that you are the problem, that other women read the same books and it held for them, that you went to the same retreat and came back emptied out in a way other attendees apparently didn't, that you have been trying genuinely, repeatedly, at real cost. And the trying itself has started to feel like evidence of something unflattering about your capacity to change. This is the specific pain of the solution cycling pattern. Not just the problem, not just the hollow, but the accumulated shame of having tried to fix the hollow and watched the fix not hold. Here is what needs to be said directly before anything else. You are not the problem. The self-help industry, all of it, the books, the retreats, the wellness frameworks, the therapeutic modalities built around insight and reframing, is almost entirely designed to work at one level, the level of behavior, of pattern, of response. And what's happening in midlife, for a lot of women, is not at the level of behavior. It is significantly deeper than that. To understand why the solutions didn't hold, it helps to understand what they were actually touching and what they weren't. Behavioral tools work at the level of patterns. How you respond to stress, how you talk to yourself, what habits you build, what thoughts you interrupt. These are real interventions. They produce real results. For a very specific category of problem, they work completely. But the midlife identity crisis is not a pattern problem. It is a self-concept problem, which is a different architecture entirely. Here is the distinction. A pattern lives in how you move through your life. A self-concept lives in who you believe you are while you're moving through it. You can change every pattern in your daily life. Your morning routine, your communication style, how you set boundaries, how you spend your Saturdays, and still wake up feeling like a stranger to yourself. Because the patterns changed. The self didn't. This is not a critique of self-help. Some of those books are precise and well-researched and written by people who genuinely understand behavior. The problem is not that they're wrong. The problem is that they are tools built for a different depth. Imagine being handed a detail brush when what you need is to re-pour the foundation. The brush is a good brush. It does exactly what it's designed to do. It just cannot reach what you're asking it to reach. The midlife identity crisis, specifically, is what happens when decades of performing roles have eroded the self-concept underneath those roles to the point where the roles themselves are all that's left. Not the patterns of how you play the roles, the deeper architecture of who you are when the roles are removed. And that architecture, the self-concept layer, does not respond to behavioral intervention the way a pattern does. It responds to something slower, something more specific, something that starts not with changing how you act, but with excavating what you believe about who you are. It's not a symptom, it's information. The fact that the solutions didn't hold is not information about your inability to change. It is information about the depth of the wound, and depth requires a different kind of tool. Here is an image that might make this concrete. Cracks appear, you patch them. The patches hold, then the foundation shifts again, and the cracks return, sometimes in the same place, sometimes somewhere new, so you patch again. Better this time. You research the best compounds for this kind of crack. You ask people who've done it successfully. You apply the patches with more precision, more commitment, and they hold for a while, until the foundation moves again. This is not a failure of the patches. The patches are doing exactly what patches do. The problem is that no patch, however well applied, addresses a shifting foundation. The problem is structural, root level, and it requires a different category of intervention. For women in this specific moment, the midlife identity reckoning, the void that doesn't respond to the usual interventions, the foundation that has been shifting is the self-concept itself. The decades of self-erasure didn't just change your patterns. They changed what you believe is possible for you, what you believe you're allowed to want, what you believe you are, underneath the roles you perform. And that layer, the belief layer, the identity layer, is what the books couldn't reach. Not because the books weren't good, because they weren't designed to go that deep. Root-level work looks different. It starts with something the behavioral tools often skip: excavation before reconstruction. Not asking what should I do differently, but asking what do I actually believe about who I am, and where did that belief come from, and is it mine? Those are identity layer questions. They are slower than behavioral questions. They produce less immediate satisfaction, but the changes they generate don't seep back out after 3 weeks. Because you didn't patch the crack, you went to the foundation. If this is landing, if the distinction between surface and root is clarifying something that's been confusing for a long time, there is a resource in the description built specifically for this layer of the work, not another framework for changing your patterns. A structured 6-week process for the identity layer, starting from the void, building toward clarity, and ending with something concrete that fits a real, complex life. It's called the Second Chapter Blueprint, and the link is in the description and the pinned comment. So what does this mean practically? Not as a plan, but as a frame you can actually use. There are 3 signals worth knowing. 3 ways to recognize, in the future, when an intervention is working at the behavioral level instead of the identity level, so the mismatch stops catching you off guard. The first signal, the relief it produces, is circumstantial, meaning it holds when the conditions that produced it are present. When you're still on the retreat, still in the weekly session, still in the momentum of the new habit. The moment those conditions ease, the relief eases with them. Root-level shifts don't work this way. They change what you believe, not just how you feel. And changed beliefs hold across circumstances because they're not dependent on the circumstances. The second signal, the work addresses what you do but not what you think you are. There is a particular quality to a session or a book or a practice that is working purely at the behavioral level. It produces very good answers to the question, how should I handle this situation? But produces silence when you ask, who am I when I'm not handling a situation? That silence is the gap between pattern and identity. And it's useful information, not a reason to abandon the tool, but a signal that you've hit its depth limit. The third signal, the insight makes sense but doesn't move anything. This one is subtle and important. There is a very specific experience of reading something completely true, understanding it intellectually, feeling its accuracy, and then returning to the same state as if the insight never happened. This is not cognitive failure. This is depth mismatch. Recognizing these 3 signals does something important. It stops the pattern of self-blame that accumulates every time an intervention doesn't hold. Because now you know what to look for. You're not asking, what's wrong with me that this didn't work? You're asking, what level was that tool operating at? And is that the level where my work actually is? That question is itself a root-level intervention. Because it comes from a woman who trusts her own read on what is and isn't reaching the wound. And that trust, even in small amounts, is part of the foundation being rebuilt. If you want to go further with what this video opened, the Second Chapter Blueprint is in the description. A structured process built specifically for the identity layer, not the behavioral one. What's the solution you tried that gave you the most hope? And when did you realize it wasn't going to hold? Here is what to leave with today. Not a plan. Not a new thing to try. Just this. The hollow came back every time not because you failed the intervention. It came back because the intervention was not designed for the depth you were asking it to reach. That distinction matters, because there is a version of this story where the woman who tried all those things is someone who couldn't commit, couldn't follow through, was somehow resistant to her own healing. And there is another version, the accurate one, where she is someone who was handed surface tools for a root-level wound and used them as well as anyone could and found, predictably, that they couldn't go deep enough. She wasn't failing the solutions were failing the problem. And here is the thing about that. The fact that she kept trying, even when it didn't hold, is not evidence of naivete. It is evidence that she knew something was there, that the wound was real, that the work was necessary, that the woman underneath the roles was worth going back for. She didn't disappear overnight. She disappeared in increments. And finding her again does not happen overnight either. But it also does not require trying the same tools at a deeper intensity and hoping this time they reach. It requires different tools. Tools built for the foundation, not the surface. Tools that ask identity layer questions and stay with the answers long enough to let them change something permanent. The woman who tried all those things was not the problem. She was looking, and looking, even with the wrong tools, even when it didn't hold, is not the same as giving up. It never was.